Hey, welcome. It's Zane Starr, founder of Ships. And today I kind of wanted to do devlog number one, um, successor to devlog number zero. And so I wanted to talk today about what we do for tests and to just kind of walk you through it really quickly, just so that we can get an overview of like how you could structure testing contracts or the layout for your sort of dev environment. Some tips and tricks. It's going to be pretty short. So let's get into it. All right. So if we look through my code here, we have contracts, which is just the organization that I put all of my smart contracts in. So in this case, we have a fungible token smart contract. It's pretty generic. We have this market simple contract, and we have this entity simple. This is all sort of like forked from the marketplace through like the Near Foundation they put out with Near Apps and the wonderful work of Matt Lockyer. And so I've used these as kind of like a shell for jumping off and just literally a fork. So that way we can get to like sort of testing the ideas and the innovations that we're trying to bring into the secondary marketplace. Okay, so next thing we have are generated clients. So if you watched video one, I talked about OpenRPC and how we generate TypeScript clients for our smart contracts. And so I have one for the fungible token, the marketplace contract, and the non-fungible token. And then here's sort of like the magic or the secret sauce. What I've done is try to make a streamlined testing environment as possible where I can take advantage of the Near test dev deploy accounts. So unless you're not familiar, in case you're not familiar, what Near allows you to do is to create a testnet account, all from the CLI, and it'll auto-generate a public and private key for you. And it says like, oh, okay, well, this is your dev account, this is the account environment. And this kind of allows you to script how you want to like interact with this contract and to make it more like sort of shareable across your like ecosystem. In a later video, I'll go over how I connect this to a UI and then tie this to ships because these are like kind of separate projects. But I think it's good to just do a tiny deep dive first. So we have near dev, FT, MKT, and NFT. And then this NFT directory is actually a spec that we're going to open source and put into its own sort of repository that describes what makes an NFT. And the same thing with this FT directory here. So I know a lot of directories, it's the same with the simple NFT and simple FT because these are just like specific instances of like basically the NFT contract. All right, so we're gonna scroll down a little bit and then we're gonna take a look at sort of what our package JSON looks like. So within package JSON, we have a whole lot of scripts. Scripts for everything. But the thing that we're going to try and take a look at most is build contracts, which of course just is focused on compiling the contracts. And then we're going to take a look at what Dev, Alice, and Bob does, which are like our fake user accounts. And then we'll have a look at what deploy N and F do and how I use near dev deploy to like deploy the smart contracts. So basically the way that it works is I call, let's see, let's clear this. I call npm run dev deploy, just dev deploy, and it will run these individual like deploy scripts. So what it does is it does this little echo in. And so this is just a bash command to say no, because otherwise it will prompt you. And what happens is I will specify what WASM I want to push up to the testnet. And what it will do, if it doesn't already exist, is it will create a directory called near dev. And so what I'm doing is taking that same directory and putting it into its own specific contract. So what this allows me to do is to have a separate dev account for each contract. Now there are a couple different ways to do that, and Alice and Bob script here kind of highlights another approach will allow you to make a sub account. But this is just a really simple way for me to toggle the different sort of contracts that I need to get access to. That's pretty easy and sort of reliable. So I have this deploy script, I run this, and it generates, let's see, these folders here with the standard dev account. And so this is just a private key, and this is a private key in an environment variable. So you have a lot of flexibility on like what you can do to make that happen. So what we're going to do is just sort of pop in the test and see like how do I access these dev accounts and what am I doing to make this like a really great system for myself. So a couple of things that you might have seen in video 0, the setup near, which is just basically a helper function that takes a network ID, so mainnet, testnet, and a key store. And sort of the interesting thing here is that the key store needs to load up a dev account. So what I did is I wrote a really simple script, a utility called get dev deploy account. And if we step into that, all it does is look for a near dev prefix, the contract type, which can be one of market, FT, or NFT, like the script said, loads this. And so the way that the credentials are set up for near credentials is just that the private key is written in dev account. So you can read that, and that will give you back the private key that you need to sort of run your account. So if we go back to the test index. Okay, so now we're ready to say, let's get the near account. What's the account ID? And so it's not the private key, really, it's just the account ID. So let's go ahead and just have a look because I misspoke there. Boom. All right, so this is just the account data, and it tells you when you near dev deploy what account you actually did. And then if you go into credentials, so I'm just gonna expand this really quick. All right, cool. So now you can see this. So if we go ls tilde credentials, near credentials, let's go ahead and close this out. All right. So what we see here is near credentials, we see default, and then this used to be the organizational structure. And now it's specified to the actual network you're on. And so we see all of these dev accounts that I created over time. And I'm not gonna like cat that because that reveals a private key. I don't know, just good practice. But essentially, what you have here is access to the private keys for that particular account. So if we go back to test index, and just go ahead and zoom this back down. Okay, cool. We go back to text index. We've gotten the account ID for each of one of these actors here. There's this Alice and Bob thing, which we'll jump into, and then we're kind of on our way. So let's see where we use load accounts. So before all the tests, first thing we do, set up our connection. Then we load the accounts of that connection. We say, hey, use the default key store. The default key store ports to near credentials. So now it's going to map the account ID to the private key. So if we go back here, we can step through. And then we'll have this little feature here called make a fungible token contract. And if we step through that, it's basically taking the client and then just making it easy for myself to get back a RPC, JSON RPC client to make requests to the smart contract. So if we go back to where we were, load accounts, I think. Okay. All right. So we've loaded the accounts, dev accounts exist. Now, when we call get fungible token, we are actually just referring to the JSON RPC interface, and underneath the hood, the client will resolve where or how to make a request as this account via the near credentials folder and the default key store. And so that all just works underneath the hood. And this allows us to do kind of fancy things like check the NFTs for owner, to switch between context. So in this case, this context is the context of Alice, which is one of our user accounts. If we look somewhere else and get NFT, we're doing this context from Bob, which is another account, and it doesn't require us to basically rewrite a large swath of code to connect to the right address or to figure out the right key store key pair value. So one of the things I wanted to look at was this Alice and Bob script, because this is what I do to create sub accounts. So for sub accounts, it's slightly more complicated. And so what I opted to do is to just write a small JavaScript, just plain old JavaScript, to basically create sub accounts for each of the contracts I've already like deployed. So basically the way it works is it says, hey, you have a market, you have a fungible token, an NFT token. Why don't I just make a sub account from whatever was created in the dev account? This is probably not the best way to do it. It would probably be better if I just created near dev underscore user. And then I just said, okay, for near dev underscore user, let's create an account where the dev user is the master account, and we move forward from there. But I didn't, so we'll step through it. And this was just kind of born out of convenience. So here, I just prefix its command with Alice or Bob. It rolls through the various different accounts that I want to create. It gets the contract name, so it knows that it's dev-12387- whatever. Okay. And then what it does here is it says await promise all. So we're going to simply map over all of the credentials that we got in terms of all the account IDs, and we're going to just output this script. So we'll output this and we'll create essentially this little file. And this basically allows you to set the initial balance and what the master account is, and then what the sort of user account for those contracts are. Okay, the next thing that we do is then, let's see, scroll up. One of the nice things about this, I'll say, when we go to tests again, one of the nice things about this is that when I want to figure out dev accounts for like Bob or Alice, it's really easy for me to know or just pick an account that I've already deployed. In this case, I'm just using the pre-existing account ID and just append Alice or Bob, and I know that it's a valid sub account. So now I can do all kinds of complicated things from various contexts, and I have enough accounts to like do it. Okay, so that was devlog 2, a sort of quick overview of how we structure things to have tests. And again, this code is going to be pushed up soon. Just kind of closing around a couple of themes to make things really smooth and like very understandable. All right, thanks. Have a good one. Oh, can't exit. Well, since I'm here, be sure to join us on Discord. Check for the link in the YouTube video. And I am stoked to be able to share this with you. Have a good night.